everyone, welcome back to Strange Minds 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Creepers Mirror Mirror, Volume 10, written by Edgar J. Hyde. Before we begin, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and without further ado, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it. Chapter 9, Sarah's Story. Jim, Aunt Camilla, and Sophie were on their hands and knees in the middle of the small garden. The amount of dead shrubbery Jim had cleared had made a huge difference, and by the time dusk fell that night, the little party had in fact uncovered another 3 gravestones. A Mr. and Mrs. Deloitte were buried there, as well as their son, Edward. I guess they must have been the family that lived here, and the Fotheringhams were their employees, said Maya. Aunt Camilla glanced at her niece. How did you know that? How do you know it wasn't the other way around? Oh, just a guess, she said. Maybe you're right. Maybe the Doylets were the ones working here. I have no idea. Anyway, let's go back in and eat. I'm starving. Aunt Camilla stood up and brushed the dirt from her pants. I'm hungry too, I know. I know. Why don't we get takeout? Anybody want pizza? Aunt Camilla looked at the gardener. What about you, Jim? Would you like to stay with us for dinner? Jim looked at Aunt Camilla, then at the faces of the 3 girls looking expectantly back at him. What do you think, girls? Maya and Danny had by now decided that he was actually all right, so they agreed with Aunt Camilla that it would be nice to have an extra guest for dinner. The 5 of them sat around the table in their warm kitchen, eating large slices of pizza, drinking juice, and discussing the day's events. I think we should get up bright and early tomorrow and clear away the rest of the brush, said Aunt Camilla. Maybe we could plant some new flowers and make the garden look really nice again. What a great idea, said Danny. I wonder why the last owner let it get so overgrown. Once the girls had finished dinner, almost everybody went outside again to look at the progress they had made on cleaning the gravestones. Jim was anxious to keep cleaning, but Camilla insisted he had done enough for the evening. Maya and Danny excused themselves for more juice, promising to meet with the rest outside after. In reality, the girls were going into the study to try and talk with Sarah again. They entered the study and wound up the music box quickly, staring once again at the mirror. Sarah, please talk to us. We promised we'd come back, and we're here. The mist slowly began rolling across the mirror. And Sarah appeared. Good evening, she said to the 2 sisters. Good evening, they replied. How are you feeling today? Asked Maya. How do you think I'm feeling? Upset, confused, frightened. I understand, said Maya. You must be all of those things, but please, I really think this is your only chance. Can't you try and get the mirror to show the scene? Will you try, please? Well, I've thought long and hard, and I've decided that yes, you're probably right. I really do have to do this. Please, she whispered. Please let me see what happened that day. All of a sudden, there she was. Sarah was outside the house, enjoying what looked to be a beautiful sunny day, and though she had spent most of her mornings in the kitchen helping her mother, she was now determined to enjoy the sunshine. She had picked flowers for her mother and was about to take them to her in the kitchen. Heading toward the kitchen, Sarah stopped in the hall. She could hear raised voices coming from where she knew her mother would be. She started to walk more quickly, alarmed in case her mother was in sort of danger. As she drew nearer, she realized it was his voice. It was the gardener, the one she had never liked, the one who insisted on taking her mother out walking, and the one who told her what a badly behaved, spoiled little girl she was. She wasn't bad or spoiled at all. She adored her mother, but she just knew that this man was bad and she didn't want him anymore near her mother. His voice was getting louder. What was he saying? You have to make a choice, Hannah, she heard him shout. You have to pick. It's either her or me. She's so spoiled. Why can't you see it? You couldn't possibly ask me to tolerate that child. Anyway, my wages aren't enough to pay for 3 of us to live the way you've been accustomed. Sarah froze. He was trying to make her mother choose between her or him, trying to split them up. No, no. Her voice screamed inside her head. She had to get to her mother and tell her not to listen. Then she heard her mother's voice. She sounded angry. Rich, I've told you 100 times, it's over. I want no more to do with you. I've chosen Sarah over you. And let's face it, there never was a choice. I never loved you. I want you out of my life and out of my daughter's life. Please leave me alone, or you'll force me to tell Mrs. Dulett about your behavior. Oh, that's how it is it? Shouted Rich at the top of his lungs. It's you who's been chasing after me. It's obvious to everyone. What about the day you asked me for a ride into the village for food? Rich, I needed groceries, and I couldn't carry them on my own. If I had thought you would have read so much into it, I wouldn't have asked, believe me. As it is, you've never let me forget it. I will never ask you for another favor so long as I live. Now please, just get out of my kitchen and let me get on with my job. But it's not your kitchen, is it? It's hers. It belongs to Mrs. Snooty upstairs. Rich, please don't talk about Mrs. Dulett like that. She's been so good to us. Huh? She may have been good to you and that brat of yours, but she couldn't care less for the likes of me. Then his voice softened. He began to beg. Hannah, please, please change your mind. I can't bear to live without you. I love you. I adore you. Please marry me. Come away with me. We'll be so happy together. By the time Sarah had pushed open the door, just enough to make out her mother and Rich standing at the end of the kitchen, he was folding onto Mother's arms tightly. Let go of me, Rich. Let go of my arms now. You're hurting me. Can't you see you're hurting me? It was at that point that Sarah burst into the room screaming and flailing her arms. Leave my mother alone! You're hurting her. Didn't you hear what she said? Yes, I'm hurting her, aren't I? Because she hurt me, and I'll hurt her even more if she doesn't do what I say. So leave us alone, brat. This has nothing to do with you. I'll sort this out. Sarah flew at him then. I won't tell you again. Leave my mother alone. She began pummeling the man's back with her small fists as hard as she could, harder and harder, but she was little, and he was such a big man that her punches had no effect on him whatsoever, and he merely continued to hold Hannah, her hands pinned behind her back. Tell the brat to leave us alone. Tell her to get out of the kitchen before I do something we'll all regret. Hannah, unable to free her wrists from his grasp, instead pulled back her leg and delivered as hard of a kick as she could to Rich's shins. Ow! He yelled, and angrier than ever, he let go of the woman's wrists and slapped her hard across the face. When Hannah lifted her head up from the blow, Sarah could see a trickle of blood coming from the side of her mother's mouth. This was more than she could bear. She started to hit him and kick him and punch him, screaming all the time at him to leave her mother alone. Her mother tried to reassure her she was all right, but by this time Sarah was in a complete frenzy. She had dashed to the kitchen table, looking for something to strike this monster. First thing that came into her hand was a knife. It was the largest knife in the kitchen. She ran at Rich, almost blind with panic and fear, and just as she got within striking distance, he seemed to sense both her and the danger behind him, jumped out of the way. The knife that was meant for Rich plunged straight into her mother. Rich, almost triumphant, was shouting, "You've killed her. Look what you've done. I always knew you were bad, and now you've killed your own mother. Look what you've done." She fell to the ground, and as she fell, she hit her head on the corner of a small table. Just as Sarah fell to the floor, two people joined them in the kitchen. Young Mr. Edward and his stable hand stood in the doorway, having heard the commotion from outside. Edward ran to where Sarah lay and picked her up. He hugged her tightly to him. "Sarah, oh Sarah, what happened?" he wept. He felt for a pulse in her neck, but could not find any. Reluctant to put her down, he cradled her against him for a while longer, then gently carried her from the kitchen into the living room, where he placed her on one of the sofas. Returning to the kitchen and realizing that Hannah was still alive, though her breathing was very shallow, he sent his stable hand to fetch the doctor from the village. The awful gardener was standing in the corner, looking almost pleased with himself. "Get out," said Edward through clenched teeth. "Get out of here and never let me set eyes on you again, if you know what's good for you." Rich did leave, because he decided it was probably best to go out now before the law got involved. He had a past he would prefer the police didn't know about. Edward carried Hannah to his own mother's bedroom and waited there for the doctor to arrive. When he did arrive, a short time later, he had a quick look at Sarah, but only confirmed what Edward already knew. "I'm afraid she didn't make it. Nothing we can do here. She hit her head and unfortunately didn't survive the fall." The mirror flashed forward to a week or so after Sarah died. Hannah Fotheringham lay propped up in bed. Mrs. Deloitte and Edward chatted with her as she tried to eat some breakfast, though she had been hurt at the time and was on the verge of blacking out. She had seen what had happened and knew that her daughter had died trying to save her. Her eyes filled with tears. I can't believe Sarah is gone. She was my life. I adored her completely. What will I do now without her? She buried her head in her hands and sobbed. Mrs. Dorlet placed a comforting arm around the weeping mother's shoulder. I know, my dear, and I know you'll never forget Sarah, or indeed the awful way in which she died. We'll have her buried in the family cemetery in the garden, so she's always close by. You can plant whatever flowers you like. We'll be sure to keep the garden beautiful for you and for Sarah. I know it's a little condolence, but at least you'll feel she's always nearby. Hannah simply shook her head. It was obvious. She wanted her girl back with them. She clutched tightly to the flowers Mrs. Dorlet had brought from the garden and cried. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10. Free from the Frame. Maya, coming slowly back to the present, realized her eyes were wet with tears. She rubbed at them quickly before Sarah could see and walked closer to the mirror. The scene had faded completely now, and Sarah still sat huddled in the corner, the little puppy licking at her fingers almost as though she too sensed that something was wrong. Sarah? Maya said gently. Are you all right? Sarah lifted her eyes from her hands and turned to look at Maya. I can't believe what I've just seen. She didn't die. I didn't kill my mother. After all, look what I've had to endure for all these years, and for nothing. Oh, I don't know how to feel. She barely finished the last sentence before she burst into tears, great resounding sobs that shook her whole body. Danny stepped toward the mirror as though reaching out for the girl to comfort her in some way. I'm sorry, Sarah, she murmured. You can walk away now to be with your mom, to take your place beside her where you should have been years ago. Sarah looked at both sisters and swallowed hard. You're right. I know that. I just don't know if I have the courage. I've gotten so used to being here, and anyway, how do I escape from the mirror? I know my mind has been freed, since I now know the truth, but my soul is caught up in this awful web, and I don't know how to untangle it. I think I know how, but I'm going to be in serious trouble with Mom and Dad for what I think I need to do. Who knows if they'll ever believe a word of this story. Maya stepped back. No, wait, what are you doing? Releasing you, Sarah. It's the only way. Sarah looked at the girls and then at the mirror surrounding her. I guess you're right, said Sarah. It is the only way. But it is also all that I have known for a long time. That's okay, Sarah, said Danny. Sometimes you have to venture out, at least so your soul can find some rest. Goodbye, Sarah, Maya whispered, motioning Danny to do the same. Lifting the music box high in the air, Maya threw it with all her might right at the center of the mirror. When they uncovered their eyes, there was nothing left of the mirror except for the golden frame. Danny heard a little bark and behind the desk there she found Sweetie. "Oh, come here, girl. Are you all right? Oh no, look, Maya. She cut her paw on the glass." Danny grabbed a bandage from a nearby drawer and placed it in the puppy's paw. "Well," sighed Maya, "do you think it worked? Do you think we freed her?" "I think so," replied Danny. "I'm sure she's gone to her final resting place now. You've given her peace finally." As the girls emerged from the back entrance of the house, they saw their mom and dad's car parked in the driveway, having just returned from their weekend away. What would they say when they saw the mirror? Maya wondered. They had tried to sweep up the broken glass. But they knew they would, of course, notice upon first walking in. They were talking to Aunt Camilla, Sophie, and Jim, no doubt being shown around the newly cleared garden. Maya and Danny walked toward them, watching as Sophie's eyes grew wide with excitement as she noticed Sweetie. She ran toward her little dog, almost knocking Mr. Molina out of the way in her hurry. "Hi, Mom, Dad," said the two girls. "Did you have a nice time?" Maya asked. "Yes, sweetheart. We had a lovely time. But we missed you so much that we decided to come home a little early." The girls all looked at one another. "But have you seen the lovely work Jim has done on the house while you guys were gone?" Danny said in an effort to distract them. She hoped to buy any time for the shock that would come. "How about you girls? What did you do this weekend?" "Well, Mom," said Maya, "I'm afraid it's kind of a long story." And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter. Well, it's the end of the book. And definitely tune in for the next book. I think I'm gonna be reading Dr. Death. Well, why don't you guys leave a comment? What would you prefer me to read? Dr. Death, Cold Kisser, The Scarecrow, or The Gravedigger? Leave a comment down below, and the comment that receives the most likes, I'll read. How about that? But as always, my dear friends, this has been Ruby signing off, and may you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night whenever this video reaches you.